Welcome back to the JavaScript Essential Training Series. I am Mike King, your host, and in this tutorial we'll be looking at operators in JavaScript Part 2. So we're actually going to finish up that operators tutorial that we started in the previous tutorial, and we're actually going to look at the comparison and logical operators. And you'll notice by the chart on the screen that the double equal sign is equal to, triple equal sign is equal value and equal type, and I'll demonstrate that in the lab because there's a difference between the double and the triple equal. The exclamation point equal is not equal. The exclamation point with a double equal is not equal value or not equal type. And then we have the greater than, the less than sign, the greater than or equal to, the less than or equal to, plus the ternary operator. And we're going to go demonstrate all of these inside our lab so you can see how they work inside of JavaScript. So let's move into our development environment and demonstrate those operators inside of JavaScript. Alright, so let me go ahead and minimize our presentation and drop into our development environment. First thing I want to do, let me confirm that we've got the Apache server up and running, which we do. I want to go in and load Sublime Text 3, which will be my text editor for this demonstration. I'll be using Google Chrome as the browser. I am still in section 1 of the JavaScript Essential Training Series in the event that you purchase the tutorial and have access to all the exercise files. I'm going to go ahead and take this template.html file. I'm going to do a save as. I want to save this as operators_3.html. Again, I want to make sure that you have access to all these exercise files. I'm going to go in here right under my container. Let's go put in an H3, and I'm just going to put in operators in JavaScript. Go ahead and close out that H3. Want to go in right below that, put H4, and we're going to set this up basically like we had set up the previous example, and this time we're going to do some comparison. In fact, actually it's comparison and logical. We'll use both because they'll both be part of this demonstration. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. Let's go ahead and make certain that we've got that file loaded inside of our browser, and we do. Excellent. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit different than the last demonstration because we're actually going to have to use a conditional statement for you to understand how these operators work. I understand you haven't learned conditional statements yet, but they'll be coming up very soon. So if you don't understand what I'm doing with this conditional if statement, don't worry about it. Just pay attention to how the operators are working in it because we will actually have quite a few tutorials on conditional statements inside of JavaScript because there's a bunch of different kinds that we can use. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a paragraph in here, because we're going to do this one a little different than we did the previous. I'm going to give it an ID, and that's going to be equal to PARA. And then I'm just going to close that paragraph opening tag, put in some default text, and then I'm going to close my paragraph tags. And the only reason I'm setting out the paragraph is that's where we're actually going to get the responses back from our script. So if I were to update my window, you'll see I've got that default text in there for that paragraph, and we'll be using to overwrite that ID based on how our tag works. I'm going to open up my script tags. Then I'm going to come down a couple of lines and close that script tag. And then inside the script tags, the first thing I want to do is create a few variables. So I'm going to create a variable called num1, and that variable is going to be equal to, and I'm going to give it a value of 10. Then right below that, I'm going to create another variable called num2, and that variable is going to be equal to 20. Then I'm going to create another variable called num3, and this variable is going to be a string that's equal to the value of 10. And I want to end all those statements with a semicolon. Let me go ahead and indent this. Following best practices. It should always be indented inside of our script tag. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes in our document. Now what I want to do is I actually want to set up a conditional statement. And again, don't worry if you don't understand this conditional statement. The main focus of this tutorial is on the operators that we're using in the conditional statement. So I'm just going to put a if statement with an open and closing parentheses, opening and closing curly brace, then I'm going to type an else, and then I'm going to have another set of opening and closing curly braces. So what I want you to do, it's a great time for you to pause to type the variables and the structure of our conditional statement. Now what I want to do is in that first set of curly braces, I'm actually going to copy this from my text file so you don't have to watch me type it. I'm just going to paste in here a let me go ahead and extend this so we don't have a wrap. No wrapping text. So I put document.getElementById. You notice I'm referencing that paragraph element. We've already covered this in an earlier tutorial. And I'm just changing the text inside that paragraph ID or para ID if this evaluates to true. And then I'm going to come right below it. And again, I'm going to copy this from my exercise file. In my else condition, this is the text that's going to be displayed if the condition is false. And one thing you'll learn about conditional statements when we go through the training is that whatever is in the parentheses, if it evaluates to true, the condition is met, and it's always going to execute that first set of code. If it evaluates to false, it's either going to execute what's in the else portion of the code, or it's going to drop out altogether and just continue on with the code structure based on the sequence that the statements are entered in. So that's the key with conditional statements. Whatever is in the parentheses needs to be true. So let's try the first one. So I'm going to say num1 is equal to num2. And now keep in mind we're using the double equal sign because that's equal to inside our comparison operators. If I used a single equal sign, I would be reassigning the value of num1 and making it equal to num2. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. Based on what these values are, we know that num1 is not equal to num2, so we should get the condition is false at our statement. So let's go ahead and save the change, refresh our browser window, and we get the condition is false because they're not equal. If I were to change this to a single equal sign, because keep in mind now I'm assigning it, this will always evaluate to true. Always. Because I'm basically taking whatever the value is of num1 and making num2 equal to it. So again, refresh the browser window. That'll always be true because I'm reassigning the value of num1 and making it equal to num2. So don't forget, there's a huge difference between an assignment operator and the comparison operator. When we're comparing, it's always the double equal sign. All right, now let's look at another one. So num1 is equal to num2. We know that's false. How about if I said is num1 greater than num2? And we know that's false because num1 is 10, num2 is 20, so num1 is not greater than num2. When I refresh, that comes up false. How about if I made it less than num2? Save that. That's going to be true because num1 is 10, num2 is 20, so it is less than num2. So hopefully you're getting an idea of how these comparison operators work. Now here's a tricky one. Is num1 equal to num3? Save the change. Now this may throw you a curveball because this is actually going to evaluate to true. Num1 is equal to num3, but it's not identical because num1 is 10, num3 is 10, but num3 is a string. So if I actually add a third equal sign, now is num1 equal to and equal type? In other words, is the variable type and the value the same as num1? That's going to evaluate to false because it's not true. They are equal values, but they're not equal types. Because again, this is a string, this is numeric. So that one can sometimes throw you a curveball. Let's look at a different one, and let's say, let's look at less than or equal to. So is num1, let's actually add another variable here. Let's say variable num4, and we're going to say that num4 is also equal to 10. So now I say num1. Is num1 less than or equal to num4? And that should actually come up true. It is actually less than or equal to because they are equal. Now if I say is num1 identical to num4, and again remember now we're looking for the value and the type, and actually that should evaluate true because they're both numeric and they're both the same value, so that comes up true also. So that's how our comparison operators work. We have an equal to, we have an identical, equal value, equal type, we have not equal, and again don't forget not equal is right here. I could actually use the not symbol and equal, and let's say not equal to num2. So is num1 not equal to num2? And that's true. So when we go back into our browser, we should refresh, and that should actually be true statement. If I were to make this is num1 not equal to num4, that should be false because it is equal. And actually, I could actually change this and say is num1 not equal to num3. That's true. Num1 is equal to num3. So save that. False. It is equal to num3. Now, is it identical to num3? Is num1 not identical to num3? And again, that's true. Because remember, we're reversing it. They are identical. So I'm asking, is it not identical? But they are identical, so that's going to come back true. So you've seen how we use the operators inside of JavaScript. It's an important concept. We use them a lot as we go through. And I got a couple more I want to look at. So let's continue on. Let's go back to our presentation for 1 second, and we'll come right back into our lab. All right, there's 2 more operators I want to look at before we wrap this tutorial up. I'm going to go ahead and minimize my presentation and get back into our presentation for a minute. Minimize the development environment, get back into my presentation. And there's 2 more I want to talk about real quick. They're not used very often, but I want you to be aware that they're there because we are going to see them as we go through the tutorial series. One is the type of, which returns the type of a variable. I do use this once in a while when I'm programming, not very often. And then there's another one called instance of. And this is used whenever we're dealing with classes in JavaScript. And I actually do use this one quite a bit, but it's kind of an advanced topic of JavaScript. It's when you start getting into classes and objects inside JavaScript. We will talk about this towards the end of the tutorial series. I want you to be aware that the 2 operators are there. I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate type of in the lab. I am not going to demonstrate instance of yet until we get into the classes because I think it's just going to confuse you. And I don't want to confuse you as you're just starting out. So let's go back and we're going to get into our lab environment and let me demonstrate type of operators inside of JavaScript. So I'll see you in the lab. All right, let me drop out of the presentation and get into our development environment. I'm going to bring back Sublime Text 3 and I'm going to bring back Google Chrome, which is the browser I'm using. This is going to be a relatively quick demonstration using this type of. I do use this occasionally when I'm programming. I use the instance of quite a bit when I'm working with classes. And again, like I said in the presentation, we'll get into that when we get into the classes towards the end of the series because it is an advanced topic and I don't want to confuse you working with it. The type of operator inside JavaScript is actually very cool because it'll tell me the type of variable I'm dealing with. And occasionally you'll need to know that as you're working with variables inside of JavaScript or working with objects inside of JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type an alert because I'm actually going to display this in an alert. And inside my parentheses, I'm going to type type of. And then I'm going to put what I'm looking to type of for. In this particular instance, let's say num1. So I'm looking for what type of variable or what type of object is num1. I'm going to go ahead and save the change, refresh my browser window, and it's going to tell me right in that alert box that that is a number. You'll see right there that that's a number. If I actually come in here and say, okay, what is type 3? And you'll notice that type 3, even though we have a value of a number, we're actually storing it as a string. Save that, come back, refresh my browser window, and now that comes back as a string because it is a string variable. And that's what the type of is. It actually will go out and look at a particular instance of something inside of our program and tell us what it's being stored as, whether it's an object, a variable, a string, a number. So it does come in quite handy sometimes when you're looking for the types of particular objects you're working with. I do use it occasionally. You'll see it in the tutorial series. We will actually use it a couple of times as we go through these tutorials. And again, we're going to hit instance of when we get into classes, so don't let it bother you because it is part of the advanced topics inside of JavaScript, and you will see it. It's just I don't want to put it in here right now because it would actually confuse you as we're working through some of the remaining tutorials. So I hope you enjoyed the 2 tutorials on operators inside JavaScript. They're important to understand. And now we're getting ready to jump into functions inside JavaScript, and that's actually a very interesting topic. So I look forward to seeing you when we start our journey in functions inside JavaScript.